Hello and welcome to the 2020 NPAL mentoring program. My name is David Cook and I'm a senior project coordinator at FirstPick. We are an organization that assists National PAL with managing the grant, and one of the main roles of FirstPick is to manage the online reporting site where you will enter your budget and where you will submit reimbursement requests throughout the year. So today, what we're talking about is how to enter a budget on the online reporting site. This webinar is intended for subgrantees for the 2020 National PAL program year who have already received their award information. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to log into the actual online reporting site. What you will find here is a link to the URL that will take you to the reporting site. We recommend that you use Chrome as a browser. It may work in other browsers, but it is optimized for use on Chrome, so please use that if possible. When you go to that link, you're going to see a login screen that looks something like this. Now, if you're a returning NPAL mentoring subgrantee, so in other words, if you had an award in 2019 or before, your login credentials will be the same. In other words, your username will be your email address and your password will be whatever you set it as. If you are a new organization and you're the CEO of that new organization, you will receive an email indicating that you have been set up with online access. By clicking on the link in that email, it will take you to somewhere where you can set your password and get logged into the reporting site. If you didn't receive the email or if you have any kind of issues at all, if you're a returning site and you've forgotten your password, the easiest thing to do is to email support@firstpick.org, explain your issue, and we will be able to assist you with getting logged into the site. This is also where you should send an email if you have other staff at your organization that you would like to designate as having access to the site. In other words, your program coordinator, your finance coordinator, or anyone else. Just keep in mind that we do need that authorization to come directly from the executive director or CEO of your organization in order to assure that we are only giving access to appropriate individuals at your organization. Now, once you log into the reporting site, you're going to see a screen that looks something like this. This is what we call the dashboard. We will, throughout the course of the year, we'll talk about some different aspects of this dashboard. But for the purposes of today's webinar, the primary thing that we are concerned with is this subgrants tab up the top here. So what you're going to do is click on your subgrants tab, and it will take you to a screen that looks like this. Now, if you are a returning grantee, you're going to see more than one subgrant here. We've been using this reporting site since the 2017 program year, so some of you may even see 2017, 2018, and 2019 subgrants listed there. So just make sure that for the purposes of this year, you are clicking on the one that says the name of your organization, 2020 Mentoring. The other thing to check is the status column here on the right. It will be an incomplete status as opposed to the approved status of your prior year's grants. And of course, if you're a new grantee, you will only see the one 2020 year there. In addition, some of you are organizations that may have more than one subgrant affiliated with the same organization. So obviously, you may see more than one even for the 2020 program year. But just keep that in mind as you are looking at your subgrants. When you're ready to start working on your grant, you're going to click on the actual name. This is a hyperlink that's going to take you to a page that looks like this. Just to run through a couple of the things at the top here. Obviously, you have your name of your organization, the name of the grant here. your total awarded amount. In this case, this is just an example grant. I'm going to say 25,200. Here is the date range of the grant. This is actually the full date range that National PAL have indicated that is the very earliest starting date and the very latest ending date. Some of you may be getting started after January 1st, 2020. That's fine. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we go to enter the personnel. But that's just the full date range of the grant. Over here we have the children served. This is the way to figure out if you're ever unsure about how many children you are required to serve through the grant. Well, first of all, it's going to be listed on your LOA. And the other thing to keep in mind is it's $900 per youth served. So if you take your total award amount and divide by 900, that should match that children served amount. And these other fields are not really relevant until we have started entering information on the grant. So I'm going to do that right now. So what you do next is you scroll to the bottom here. You might have to scroll down depending on the size of your browser window, and you click Update Budget. The first screen it's going to take you to is where you enter your personnel items. So when you're ready to, in other words, your employees are going to be working on the grant. When you're ready to enter your first employee, you're going to click on this Add button right here. And so what we need you to do now is type in the name of the individual who will be working on this grant, their title, so it's going to be something like Program Coordinator. This next box is where you indicate whether this is an hourly employee or a salaried employee. So in other words, if it is an hourly employee, you check it. If it is not an hourly employee, if it's a salaried employee, you do not check it. Here is where you enter their actual rate, their hourly rate. And this total hours per week box, so this is the total hours per week that this individual works for your organization. Now, many of you have different situations when it comes to the employees that are working on the grant. Some of the larger organizations have police officers or other individuals who are, given a certain percentage of their time that can be charged to the grant. Others are, would otherwise be volunteers, and you're maybe only paying them as part-time employees. So if they are a full-time employee, we would expect to see 40 hours a week in here. And let's say, they only work 15 of those hours per week on the actual NPAL mentoring grant. It would be okay if this employee only worked on the grant. It would also be okay if you entered 15 in the total hours per week box. But this total hours per week box does come into play when we look at the way that fringe benefits are calculated down below. So just keep that in mind. So like I was saying, the actual grant started January 1st. In other words, National PAL is going to allow organizations to charge expenses going back to January 1st of 2020. If you did get started on the grant a little bit later than that, which may be the case for some of your organizations, you are free to change this to whichever date that the employee actually started on the grant. For the purposes of this example, I'm just going to say that this employee started March 1st of 2020, and they're going to work through to March 1st of 2021. FICA. So moving on down to fringe benefits. FICA, in other words, Social Security and Medicare. This is something that occasionally confuses folks a little bit when they're setting up their budgets. It's actually fairly straightforward, and I'm just going to quickly walk through how to calculate FICA for either a hourly or salaried employee. When we send out the materials, we're also going to send a FICA calculator that's going to help you do this. But just as a quick example, I'm going to pull up my calculator here. And what I'm going to say is, so for this employee that I have in here, I've said that they work 40 total hours a week. Their hourly rate is, $14.50. So in other words, if we're to convert their hourly rate to an annualized salary, we would do the rate times 40 times 52 weeks in a year would give us this annual salary. And FICA is always 7.65% of annual salary. So we're going to multiply that by 0.0765. And this gives me this number, 2307.24. So that's how you should calculate it. Now keep in mind with this number and with all of the numbers that we're putting in here, they're not set in stone. So in other words, you do not have to claim exactly this amount for this employee during the year. Budgets, we understand, are an estimate. This employee is not necessarily going to work exactly 15 hours every week. There may be weeks where they work more, weeks where they work less. So don't get too worried if these numbers are not exact by the time we get to the end of the year. Now these other boxes, medical, dental, short-term, long-term, life, and other, it's less common that anybody claims anything here, but just so you know how this works, this would be the employer portion, so the what it costs you to provide these benefits to your employees. So for example, and their annualized amount. So let's say it costs your organization $200 per month. That's how much the employer pays to provide medical for this employee. I would take $200 a month times 12 would give me $2,400 a year. And let's say it costs, $50 a month for dental. That would be $600 here. And so on for short-term disability, long-term disability, life. If you have other, we included other just to kind of include everything else. So let's say, I don't know, it's a 401k or a 403b contribution here, and that costs you $500 a year. You can put that in there. If you are going to do that, what we ask is you include a note that says other equals 403b contribution, just so we know why you're including that in there. Now, I've entered all of these numbers, but you will notice that nothing has actually changed in my budgeted amount. That's because what I need to do now is I need to hit the Update Amounts button. Every time you hit Update Amounts on any page in the budget, it's going to recalculate everything that you have entered. So I'm going to hit that there. And just to talk a little bit about what it's done here. So I've told the system that this employee earns this amount. They work this total hours a week, this many hours on the grant. This is the percentage of their time that they work on the grant. So in other words, 15 out of 40 hours a week. And what the system's done is based on the actual number of days between the start date and end date and all of this information we've given it, it has calculated that you're going to be paying this employee $11,372.14 from the grant. And then similarly here, it's taken all of our FICA, medical, dental, and other, it's added all of these up together and multiplied that by the 37.5%, and it's given us a total fringe benefits amount to be charged to the grant of $2,177.72. And that's why we're at the total here of $13,549.86. Again, this number is not set in stone, so if you don't end up spending exactly this amount on this employee, that's okay. We can make adjustments throughout the year if we have to, and also we have a little bit of leeway if there's some variance between individual line items on the budget. I'm going to real quick just show you how you would add a salaried employee. So let's say we now have our CEO, and he is a salaried employee. We're going to put in his salaried amount, again, his total hours a week. Now, keep in mind for CEOs, for finance coordinators, people like that, we're not expecting to see them working as many hours on the grant. In fact, there is a limit on the number of, the percentage of time for purely administrative staff. So in other words, for a CEO who has an oversight role, that individual can only charge up to 10% of their time to the grant. The same would be true of a finance coordinator who only prepares your monthly reimbursement request, budget, etc. So for this example, I'm just going to say 2 hours a week is what this employee works. And again, they're going to start March 1st of 2020 through to March 1st of 21. For a salaried employee, it's a little bit more straightforward. You just literally take their salary times 0.0765 for your FICA amount there. And again, whatever for the other benefits there. So again, I'm going to hit update amounts. And you'll see in this situation, this employee is only working 5% of their time in the grant, which is fine because they're a CEO really just operating in an oversight role. They're not doing direct program implementation. So this is the salary that you're going to charge for them, and here is their total fringe benefits. Excuse me. So that would be how you would add a salaried employee. One thing to note is I know that a lot of organizations who are a little bit smaller, the CEO or the executive director is probably a little bit more hands-on. So in other words, they do that administrative role, but they also work directly with the kids on program implementation. So if you had entered a CEO with like 50% of their time on the grant, that's fine. What we would ask you to do then is just add a note that says, John Doe is a CEO, but he also works, several hours a week on program implementation, and that's why they go, they're above 10% on the grant. And with that in mind, we're also going to ask that you, by clicking on this plus sign here next to the fringe benefits, that you're going to add a very brief job description of every employee. So in other words, in here I'm going to say Jane Doe works on curriculum development, mentee, mentor, matches, etc. Okay. And then this guy oversees okay, so we are going to ask that you put in a very brief description for every employee, just so we have an idea of what that employee will be doing on the grant. And then that way there's no confusion over the percentage of time that you're charging or just in general the role of that employee. A very important thing to note at this stage is if anybody is a mentor, they cannot be getting paid. So in other words, the NPAL mentoring program is designed at its very core to use volunteer mentors. So if the only thing that somebody does for your organization is act as a mentor, then they have to be a volunteer. You cannot pay them for that. If obviously, their staff would be people who work on program implementation, people who work to recruit mentees and mentors, people who do paperwork and other administration for the grant. Those are the individuals you can pay, but not volunteers. Okay, so you'll see here we have our updated total requested amount, $16,391.11. And so our personnel is now complete. We're going to now move on to the other expenses section. How we're going to do that is by clicking the next button. So when we get to the next page, it brings up this section here. This is where we add all of our additional expenses related to the NPAL mentoring grant. And we're going to talk through each one a little bit as we add them. Keep in mind that these are all sample expenses. These are the kind of things that we would expect you to add. But, obviously based on the individual requirements of your program, you may want to enter something different. So first thing to know is this carries over from a personnel page. We have already accounted for a little over 16,000 of our 25,200 budget here. Our first expense item we are going to say is the curriculum. Now, based on your LOA, every organization that received this grant is required to purchase a curriculum. National PAL will provide more information related to these curriculum providers and the cost of each one. If you do not know at this stage, when you're just creating your budget, what curriculum provider you'll be using, that's okay. We're going to ask you just to note that. But just to keep in mind, you do need to have a expense item called curriculum. The category here, there's various options, but for curriculum, we're going to leave it as other costs. Don't enter anything in this monthly rate box. We find that doesn't really come into play so much for PAL organizations, and for all of these expenses, it is a lot easier if you just go ahead and enter them in the total expense box here. I'm going to enter 1,000. I believe that will be, for the vast majority, that will be the amount that you assign to your curriculum. Again, National PAL are going to send out specific communications regarding those expenses and the specific providers. So in the notes box here, there's various options. For example, I'm going to say the badges for baseball curriculum is the one that I'm just going to say for my example. If you weren't sure, you could just note here TBD, and that would be fine. So we're going to hit save and close. As we go along, remember that we require a note for every single line item. So we do require that you click on that plus sign, and you'll see that it changes to this kind of speech bubble thing here after you've added your note. And if you want to go back and look at it at any time or edit it, you can always go back in and do that. Another thing I'll just mention here is if you make a mistake as you're entering items in the budget, and I'll just do this for the example, you can check here next to the item and hit delete. So this delete functionality is only going to be available during this initial budget development phase. If you have already submitted your budget and had it approved, you can't delete budget line items. But at this stage you can. So I'll just show you what that looks like just for the purposes of this example. So you would hit delete there, it's gone. And I'm just going to add it back real quick. Curriculum, other costs, 1,000. Badges for baseball. So like I said, everybody has to have curriculum. The next thing, which is also a requirement of the grant, is community service project. The community service project, again, is other costs for category. We're going to be providing more information during the year about this. 2,000 is an estimated number. It can be anything up to that. Some organizations have even done really good community service projects for no cost. So that's okay if you get everything donated pro bono and there ends up being no cost to your organization. But we do recommend that you budget for at least up to around $2,000 for your community service project. If you do not know at this stage what your community service project will be, that's fine. We know that some organizations take a little bit longer to figure out what they might want to do, what will work best with the kids. Don't worry about that. Feel free to enter TBD and, project TBD. That's fine at this stage. If you do have an idea of what it's going to be, go ahead and enter in there what that's going to be for returning organizations. I know some of you have had success with things like cleaning up your local PAL, doing a garden project, or maybe painting some rooms or something like that, or other sort of community events where you provide, some kind of service to the community. One thing I want to just mention here that comes up from time to time is for community service project funds, you cannot purchase giveaways for other organizations or for other groups of people. So, for example, I know that a lot of you like to do things like feeding the homeless or things like that that are providing a very specific service for homeless or other vulnerable populations like that, which is a great project to work on with kids, and I totally understand why that's valuable and why you choose to do that. But just keep in mind that mentoring dollars are very specifically appropriated at the federal level to be spent on mentoring. So, in other words, to be spent on youth and their mentors, not to be spent on other populations. So, although we would love to approve projects like that, we cannot, unfortunately, approve anything where you're giving stuff away to other groups. That would also include giving away backpacks, school supplies, different things like that. If that's your project, what I would recommend is that you find a way to get those supplies donated, and or use other funds to pay for the supplies, and maybe use NPAL mentoring funds just to pay for other costs associated with setting up the event, or for providing lunch on the day for the kids, or transportation for the kids, or something like that. But like I say, we will provide more information about the community service project, and we can talk about that throughout the course of the year. Just remember here, as you go along, click this update amounts button. It's going to update this total requested amount at the bottom here, so you can see where you're at. We still have around about 6,000 left. And then I'm just going to go through the rest here a little quicker. Okay, one of the other things that a lot of organizations have done is field trips with the kids. Now, let's say you're going to a museum or a zoo or something like that, you might have end of year trip admission costs. This would again go on your other cost category, and we're just going to put some numbers in here, and we're going to say trip to the local museum. Now, for the most part, we're looking for field trips to be educational in nature. So, in other words, science centers, zoos, museums, maybe college campus visits, things like that are providing an educational component for the youth. If it is something like a basketball game or a trip to an amusement park, those are not necessarily the preferred field trips. However, if it's a one-time trip at the end of the year as a reward for good attendance in the program, it may be allowable. But maybe run those by National PAL first, just to get an idea of whether they will allow that trip, and certainly try and keep trips to an educational purpose. The other thing about field trips is they cannot be overnight trips. It is not allowable to charge any expenses related to overnight accommodation for any trip other than the NPAL Youth Summit, which we're going to get to in a second. But any other trips that you may take out of town that would require an overnight stay, unfortunately, those cannot be charged to the grant. So again, just put as many notes there as you have. Okay, I'm going to move on to t-shirts. Again, these are all just sample items here, but we found that t-shirts are something that a lot of organizations find beneficial. We're going to add this under the supplies category. So when you're buying physical things like t-shirts, it becomes supplies. Let's just put a number in there. And the important thing to note about t-shirts is they should be very basic t-shirts that are designed just to help you identify the kids when you're out and about on field trips. We're not talking about sports jerseys here, or polos or anything like that. These are basic cotton t-shirts. The cost of the t-shirts with possibly screen printing costs to have the name of your PAL organization or your mentoring program on the front. So what we're going to ask is that you say, for safety and identification purposes on field trips. The other thing to keep in mind here is it should be just exactly the amount of t-shirts required for your program. So in other words, just the amount of youth that you are serving plus mentees. In this example, we have 28 youth. At a 7-to-1 ratio, you would need 4 mentees, so that would be 32. You can buy a few extras, so let's just say, in this example, 36 t-shirts. But you couldn't buy, let's say, 100 or 150 because that's, obviously too many. It has to just be the amount that you need for your program. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is going to go out in some other documentation that you receive, the maximum cost per t-shirt, that includes the purchase of the t-shirt plus any printing charges, is $15 per t-shirt. That should be more than enough for a fairly basic cotton t-shirt with printing. National PAL does also allow sweaters or hoodies, and if you choose to purchase sweaters or hoodies, the maximum cost allowable there would be $25 per item. Again, to include a very basic kind of a hoodie with with printing charges. So we're going to save that. Again, I'm going to hit my update amounts button here as I go along to check that I'm not going too high. I still have a little bit left here. Some additional supplies that you can purchase, office/program supplies. Again, we're going to put this in the supplies category. We're going to say 500 here. Items such as paper, printer, cartridges, etc. So for this general office program supplies line item, what we're talking about here is, basic things: folders, pens, pencils, paper, printer cartridges, basic office supplies that you use to administer the grant. If you do, all of these items should be less than $50 individually. If you do have items that are going to be more than $50, these may be approvable on a case-by-case basis. For example, maybe you want to purchase a digital camera to take pictures of the kids during the program, or a printer to help print curriculum materials. Include that as its own line item and put justification in the notes for why you need to purchase that item. However, keep in mind that larger equipment purchases, so this includes laptop computers, large, printers or copiers, things like that are not allowable purchases with NPAL mentoring dollars. It's hard for us to determine that a laptop computer or a large printer would be used solely for the NPAL mentoring program. So that's why we really are discouraging that. So large equipment purchases are not allowable. Some other things that may be allowable would be sport supplies, and that would come under the general program supplies line item. So that might be things like basketballs, baseballs, mouth guards for boxing, boxing gloves, hand wraps. Fairly small items like that are used for sports programs. Obviously, a lot of PAL organizations use, sports as a fairly integral part of their program. So you are allowed to purchase that. Again, however, it's only supplies for your NPAL mentoring kids. So in other words, if you have 28 kids in your program, maybe it's appropriate to buy, 8 or 10 basketballs, but it wouldn't be appropriate to purchase 100 basketballs because clearly that's more basketballs than are needed for that many kids. And, the same for mouth guards, hand wraps, etc. if you have a boxing program. And also, when we're talking supplies, we're talking things like baseballs, hand wraps. We're not talking boxing rings, basketball hoops, bigger, affixed items like that. Obviously, that's equipment. And again, those are, durable beyond the life of the grant, and we can't really determine that you're only using that for NPAL mentoring youth. So please just, keep in mind to not include those big ticket items like that. Something else I'm going to include in here is snacks. And this, again, is going to be supplies. I'm going to say this for that. Now, snacks are very popular for a lot of organizations to budget to purchase snacks. What you can do is you can provide snacks for mentoring meetings, such as chips, cookies, etc. Try and make that a little bit healthier if you can. That's just some examples that I put in here. But the thing to remember about snacks for mentoring meetings is it should be items that are truly snacks. So chips, pretzels, trail mix, things like that, maybe water or sodas or milk. But, if you have the kids at the facility after school, maybe in the evening, if it's over a meal time, you are going to, it is going to help you to provide snacks to the kids to keep them focused and alert. But you shouldn't be purchasing meals, because that's not really a snack. The exception to this is pizza. Pizza actually is considered a snack for the purposes of the program. So you could theoretically purchase a couple of pizzas for your kids if they're at the facility in the evening. Again, keep in mind it should be a reasonable amount, so maybe 4 or 5 pizzas, but not 25 or 30 pizzas, because then obviously then you're not just purchasing it for the kids in your program. So that's something to keep in mind there. The only time that you are allowed to actually take the kids out for a meal or purchase a meal for the kids is for those all-day events. So in other words, if you have the kids out all day from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., you're going to have to buy them lunch or provide lunch for them. So that could either be boxed lunches that you purchase in advance. It could be something simple like a trip to McDonald's or a buffet or something like that. Obviously it shouldn't be a fancy steak restaurant, but as long as it's just an appropriate amount of food for your youth. The maximum for a lunch would be $10 per youth or mentor, and the maximum for a dinner would be $15. So that just gives you an idea of the kind of things that you could purchase there. But for any meals, the meal itself should just be a means to, provide sustenance during the day for some other event. You shouldn't ever be just taking the youth or the mentors out for dinner as an event in itself, because that's not really the purpose of the NPAL mentoring program. But like I say, just include as many notes in there as you can. So you might also say lunch for end of year trip. So I'm going to hit save there. Again, I'm going to hit my update amounts button, and I think I'm done with supplies there. I'm going to move on to my travel items. So we had the end of year field trip. I'm going to say end of year trip bus rental. Okay, and this comes under travel. So maybe it costs me $350 to rent a bus. bus for trip to museum. And that tells us what you're doing there. Some other travel expenses that may be allowable would be, we might have like a general program travel. And what I mean by this would be, let's say some programs might pick kids up from school and then drive them back, home at the end of the evening or something like that. You might have something in place like that. Also, a program coordinator or somebody like that might be required to go on trips using their own personal vehicle. Let's say you're going out to Walmart to purchase supplies. Maybe you do that, I don't know, 10 or 15 times during the course of the year. Well, you're using your personal vehicle for grant-related purchases. You are entitled to claim mileage for that at the rate of 57.5 cents per mile. So if it's, if you think you're going to do 100 miles during the year, that might be worth claiming back those expenses. So that would be, like $57.50 for mileage. That would be for travel by personal vehicle. If you do ever rent a vehicle, like I say, you can cover the cost of the actual rental of the vehicle, and then you could also cover the cost of gas and tolls. Pretty much gas and tolls, as long as you keep those receipts. If you were to take, in limited circumstances, you may take an Uber or a Lyft. Again, keep your receipts for that. It would be less likely that you would do that for grant-related purposes, but if you did, you could claim those receipts. So I'm going to say 100 for general program travel, and in this situation, I'm going to say mileage cost to pick up supplies. Okay, and then finally, my final item here, this is going to be a required event for all grantees, is the Youth Mentoring Summit. So for those of you who are returning grantees, you will know that this refers to the Youth Summit that's held in Potomac, Maryland, every summer. Details are not finalized on this yet, and I don't want to tell you anything that may change in time. The requirements in the past have varied a little bit in terms of how many youth you're required to send and how many adults. So I don't want to tell you any definite information on that. You should, at the very least, plan to send one youth and one adult from your organization. It may well be more, but at least one youth and one adult. So that will include the cost of airfare or other travel to the Washington, D.C. metro area, and the costs related to lodging and other expenses for that trip. For the time being, for the example, I'm just going to put in travel to Youth Summit to include airfare, conference fees, overnight lodging, and per diem. We will tell you exactly the per diem. Once this has been determined, we'll tell you exactly the per diem that you're entitled to claim. Per diem, for those of you who don't know, is a government rate that if you're traveling on any kind of federal award, you're entitled to claim a per diem rate for your expenses. That's for your, for your travel, for purchasing food, lunch and dinner and breakfast as you're traveling on a federal grant. But we'll give you lots more information about that in the months to come, including how many individuals you're required to send. But just keep in mind that is going to be a trip. Obviously, if you're local to the DC area, it might not, be quite as expensive to budget for the travel. Sorry, as if you're coming from, the West Coast or somewhere else in the country. So that concludes the budget here. I'm just going to hit my update amounts button here. And I'm going to figure out what I have left. So I have 25 minus 22691 2508.89. Okay. So for this final item here, I'm going to say 2508.89. And I'm going to hit update amounts. So the reason I did that was I wanted to get it exact to the penny. So my award was for 25,200, and I now have my total requested amount down here is exactly 25,200. You cannot go over that. It won't allow you to submit for over that. You theoretically could be under, but there is no reason to go under. You should be budgeting up to the full amount and making sure your organization is ready to get reimbursed for that full amount. So I'm just going to update amounts one more time here. Now you can go back to the previous page if you want to look at go back to personnel. Maybe you discovered that you wanted to change something here. You're free to do that. The other thing to note is anytime you hit previous or next, it will save everything on that page. So don't worry about not saving. That's the same as hitting next and previous. You'll notice that now that I did that I hit previous and next, everything has been separated into the categories. This is what it's going to look like for the rest of your year whenever you look in here. If you did have any general expense notes, it's kind of rare that we ask for that, but if there's general expense notes or general personnel notes, you could put that in the box there. Attachments, we haven't typically required attachments to be uploaded at the time that you create your budget. So unless you hear specifically from First Pick or NPAL, don't worry about uploading attachments at this stage with your budget. If you, for any reason, you wanted to just save what you've done, come back to it later, you could do that by hitting your save and exit button. That'll save everything that you've done, obviously. Let's say, for example, you have, you're the program coordinator and you want your CEO to look over your budget before you submit it. That's fine. Hit save and exit. They can take a look at it and then you can submit it at a later date. But for now, I'm happy with this. So I'm going to hit submit. Okay, it takes you, the page pretty much looks the same. The one thing you'll notice up the top here is the status has changed to pending review. When I click back on my subgrants button, my example PAL 2020 mentoring grant is now pending approval. That means that we at First Pick are going to review it and we're going to consult with National PAL and we're going to determine whether your budget is acceptable. We will either approve it and then the status will change to approved, or if we have questions, we're going to send it back and this is going to change to revisions needed. So you can always log back in. Well, first thing is you will receive an email when it's either approved or sent back to you for further revisions. And then the other thing is you can always click that subgrants button from your dashboard. Come back in here and check the status of your budget. You want to make sure it says approved. If it doesn't say approved, you're not going to be able to submit any reimbursement requests. So that's absolutely what you want to do there. So that concludes the budget and development webinar. The final thing I want to leave you with today is just some general contact information for National PAL and First Pick. Obviously, I'm sure you all know Angie Caffey, who's the National Grants Manager at National PAL. She is your primary point of contact for the grant in terms of, she has a final say over award amounts and what's approvable and what's not approvable. For more questions related to the reporting site itself and to individual budget and reimbursement questions. For the most part, on a daily basis, you'll deal with our first pay contacts here. So there's myself, David Cook. That's my information, and my colleagues Kamaria Carey and Matt Beeler, who I'm sure you are familiar with some of these people already, and if not, you will be hearing from us in the coming year. So that concludes the webinar for today. I look forward to working with all of you on the NPAL mentoring grant in 2020.